introducing new entries into the genre that could prove to be worthwhile.
Exactly how I
So let's take a look at every new isekai and fantasy anime from this upcoming season. Starting things off with sequels, we first have the second season of How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, a direct continuation to the comedic isekai harem we got back in 2018, bringing us more of our overpowered protagonists steamrolling through every obstacle like it's a video game on easy mode. That said, the anime as a whole may look a little bit different due to the change of studios, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects its overall quality. Next, we have the spin-off series For That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. While it does deal with events tangentially related to the main story, if you're planning to watch this expecting the same dark fantasy we got last season, well, unfortunately you're just gonna end up very disappointed. Reason being that The Slime Diaries is really more of a slice-of-life comedy than anything else. It's by a completely different studio and adapts a spin-off manga that focuses on the growth of Tempest as a community. So, rather than the whole politics, war, and genocide that's been going on in the main story, you can instead expect a lot of comedic shorts that showcase their daily life. Now, the last sequel on the list is from the second season of Welcome to Demon School. Personally, I can't say too much about it since I haven't watched it myself, but I am told that it is a pretty good anime. So, if you're interested in yet another comedic fantasy with a decent story, then this one along with the other two may be worth your time as well. Moving on to this season's new isekai. First up, we have Studio Reveru's adaptation of the light novel Slime 300, otherwise known as I've been killing slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level. Just as how the title states, our protagonist who died from overwork finds herself reincarnated as an immortal witch, one who now has the opportunity to live a life free from the stress and work of her previous world. Given that she just wants to live easy, she decides to spend the next 300 years living in seclusion, only ever going out to slay slimes for money whenever it was needed. This, of course, eventually leads her to maxing out her level and stats, which in turn starts to attract all sorts of unwanted attention, bringing us to the point at which the story starts. It basically becomes this comedic retelling of our main character's encounters. Visits from all these people and creatures that want to test their strength against this witch's supposedly unparalleled power. While this may seem like another generic isekai with a protagonist, apparently it doesn't focus too much on the whole power aspect. Instead, it's the dynamic between the characters that's set to make the novel so good. So hopefully the anime will be able to properly portray it. Now, the next anime technically isn't an isekai, but if you substitute out that parallel to a fantasy world, then you're pretty much just dealing with an isekai without the reincarnation. I mean, the main character literally has to go to an alien planet and defeat a demon. But trust me when I say that this story isn't that basic. It does use a lot of the standard fantasy elements, but it applies to the way so that you'd be surprised to see them even more. Like, the fantasy world/alien planet our main character is sent to is actually nothing more than a stepping stone for an evil organization's path towards world domination. And our protagonist just so happens to be a very skilled soldier from that organization. So, his job is to use this experimental teleporter to go and survey this alien revolution. A boring world so similar to a fantasy RPG that even the main character can't help but notice it. As for the demon lord he's supposed to be looking up for, well, that's actually just a rival organization who's out to do the same thing to us. So, everything is pretty much an over-the-top parody of all the fantasy and isekai that we've become so accustomed to. And since it is an original story written by the same author as well, I expect it to do a fairly good job at subverting our expectations. If you're looking for something a bit more deep, then the Saint's magic power is unlimited to use as a slightly more standard skill. What makes this one different, though, is that we don't follow the story they do. Instead, we follow the girl that was summoned alongside her. While both could have been the one to possess the same level magic, only one was accepted by the most enlightened. So the other simply left to go do her own, which pretty much entails selling cosmetics and potions. It's an isekai that's a bit slower in the way it presents. And because the story is meant to target a more female demographic, there's a lot more focus on our protagonist and the romantic elements of her relationships, making it more of a slice of life Jose than anything else.
That smells like he would be a sexy pirate.
Yo ho, matey.
Man, this right here, crusty, sandpaper. You don't want that. Get something better for yourself.
I finally decided to do it. I upgraded my soul. I'm about to be a new man after this.
You can literally see what's inside of the soap. I can really feel it exfoliating and getting off all that dry, dead skin.
Sea salt. Damn.
I was tanning.
I'm supposed to get you out of here.
So I'm lathering up. As you can see,
hurt you?
my skin is
No,
tingling
we're
because
still
I
in
can
negotiation
feel
phase.
the soap
They made a
just
pretty
going
solid
deep
case,
into
so it
my
was only a matter of time.
Next, we have a
Push come
couple
to shove,
fantasy
I
series
had a
that
slave
aren't
under wrap
technically
and they
isekai,
chopped
but
into little
do take
pieces.
place in an alternate video game-like
We
reality.
best get a move on.
First is the
I'm not
adaptation of
going
the light
anywhere
novel
without my
Full
ride.
Dive.
Sitting in
The
the
ultimate
garage.
next-gen Full Dive
What do
RPG
you
is even
expect?
shittier than real
At least
life.
tell me it's fast.
Since the
This
plot
ride
is
of
pretty much in
yours.
the title, I don't think you'd be surprised to know that the entire story takes place in a Full Dive RPG. The reason why it's a shitty RPG, though, is because the game itself attempts to be as close to reality as possible.
No, it
Sure,
wasn't
that
stuck.
does mean realistic
And
graphics and
no, it's
borderline
not
sentient
particularly
NPC
fast either.
interactions, but
That's
it
like
also means the player's stats are only as good as they are in real life. Plus,
We'll see
getting
how
hit
things
in game results in actual pain, and any injury sustained while in the game takes several days to heal. Because of this, a lot of the player base has already left since most of the quests are practically impossible. So, the story essentially follows this one high school student as he tries to complete what's pretty much a blindfolded no-hit Dark Souls run, on a dance pad. Now, the other game-like anime is The World Ends With You, a series centered around a death game that involves the standard elements we've seen from many of its predecessors. There's the isolated arena, a mysterious third party that's giving the players an objective to follow, and of course a bunch of powers and abilities unique to each of the players. I haven't played the Nintendo JRPG myself, but the game and its story are set to be fairly intriguing. So I'm interested to see if the anime can live up to that. As for all the other fantasy coming this season, first we have JC Staff's adaptation of the manga Eden Zero. And if the first thing that comes to your mind is the resemblance to Fairy Tail, well, that's because this series is by the same creator. As far as I know, though, the similarities to Fairy Tail end with the character designs. Yes, the story does revolve around a typical shonen adventure, but this one is more sci-fi than it is medieval. So, if a shonen space fantasy was something you've been looking for, then this may be something that could pique your interests. If you're looking for something a bit more standard, then Seven Six Revolution would be the fantasy for
Don't
you.
mention it.
But keep in mind that it is an adaptation of a mobile game, which historically speaking haven't been too great. It does, however, fill that spot for a meaningful fantasy of heroes versus the forces of evil. So perhaps a studio like Liden Films will be able to bring some life to it. Now, last but not least, we have the adaptation of the manga Dragon's House Hunting.
We made USAA insurance for veterans like Martin. When a hailstorm hit, he needed his insurance.
Pitiful world.
Your hope ends here. And your meaningless existence with it.
After fighting through countless boards and peons and becoming comfortable with the game's various mechanics, boss fights serve as milestones through which players can judge how far they've progressed. Due to this, boss encounters come in all shapes and sizes. But one thing is almost always consistent. They represent a significant step up in terms of difficulty. This can come from enhanced movesets that deal much more damage than you're used to, superior attributes that give them a significant advantage, or underhanded tactics that take you by complete surprise and just feel cheap. Despite already having numerous advantages, these cheap actions often help to turn the tide in their favour, and they explain why these bosses are often feared in the first place. As we look at the Final Fantasy franchise, there are numerous examples of bosses who have exhibited this kind of cruel behaviour. And today, we are going to be going through 7 who we have cherry-picked due to how dastardly they are. But we are going to be drawing a line. Bosses found within MMOs will be excluded, as even though there are some really nasty pieces of work like Pandemonium Warden, there are just so many found within that specific genre, you could probably make an entire list from that subject alone. So for now, we are going to be focusing on the offline, and we're going to be kicking things off with Zodiac from Final Fantasy XII. As it was based around the signs of the Zodiac, Final Fantasy XII had 12 base espers, and each one was aligned with a traditional star sign. Chaos, for example, was associated with Taurus, and Ultima was associated with Virgo. As had been the case with Final Fantasy Tactics, where there was a secret 13th parasite called Serpentarius, within Final Fantasy XII, there was a secret 13th Esper called Zodiac. This was associated with Orpheogus, the name that has now succeeded Serpentarius, and it can be fought as an optional boss within the Hidden Isles. Now, what made Zodiac so cheap is that if you weren't fully prepared, the battle could be over almost as soon as it began. And that's because upon entering the arena where Zodiac could be found, it will cast Dark Jar, a powerful dark elemental attack that had the chance to inflict an instant KO on every character.
Always disables bots. I don't do answers.
Not only that, but even if the character was already KO'd going into the conflict, this move would still inflict them with the blind status effect. Zodiac also started the fight with Reflect, Protect, Shell, and Haste, and could deal massive damage with Vanish Ray, a dark elemental attack that would often kill any target that hadn't broken the HP limit. You can try and work around the fight like everyone to get immune or absorbing dark elemental attacks, but Zodiac would be aware of this, and spam out the Dark Jar even more frequently to compensate for your attempts to tactically outmaneuver. Zodiac also pulled up some other different moves like the rest. If you had Dispelled its Reflect status, you could instead use Magic Wall, which would make it immune to magic attacks for 2 minutes. And when it was down to a quarter of its health, it would start using the Shift ability to change its elemental weakness every time it realized the player had figured it out. When in a critical health state, Zodiac then increased its attack power and used Dark Jar even more frequently. It would also become immune to physical attacks and use the Battle Cry ability to make its own attacks even stronger. Basically, Zodiac was me. And to succeed, as opposed to the fight against Yzmat, where you could just go on autopilot and let your gambits do the work for you, with Zodiac, you would need to be an active participant in the fight. As, for example, doing manual equipment changes mid-fight would make everything go much, much smoother. It meant that, all things considered, defeating Zodiac was a significant achievement. Someone else who liked to employ a nice slice of instant KO was Orphan, the final boss in Final Fantasy XIII. After fighting your way through the rather lengthy Eden dungeon, you were left to square off against Bartanders for a third and final time. And your reward for eradicating this troublesome foe was an encounter with Orphan, Falsi who acted as the source of the troops' power. Throughout the first part of the fight, Orphan would switch between two forms called Consummate Light and Consummate Darkness, and when it did, it would use Merciless Judgment, a move that inflicted fractional damage that could leave party members vulnerable, especially if they were poisoned. It was annoying, but manageable, and if the fight stayed like that, it wouldn't have been too bad. But that brings us on to the second phase of the fight. To mix things up, Orphan merged its forms and could use Merciless Judgment without any advance warning. This was rough, but again, still manageable. What wasn't manageable was a new move it gained access to
Iris
called
Tanner, I'm supposed to
Progenitorial
get you out
Wrath.
of here.
When used by Orphan, this would see its assigned target with a 50% chance of succumbing to instant death. You could
best
reduce
get him
this
over.
effect down by using 3 cherub points, but even with this reduction, there was still a 13% chance of
At least
instant
tell me
death
it's
happening.
fast. This ride
Still
of
not
yours.
great odds, but that's
No,
not
it
even
wasn't
the
as
cheap part.
And no,
That
it's
came
not
if your
particularly
party
fast either.
leader was the
Let's
unfortunate
say it's
target
between
of
you and me, huh?
Progenitorial
Make
Wrath.
it worth your
That's
while.
due to an infuriating
We'll see
piece of
about
game
that.
design. When the party leader fell, it was game over. You could be as prepared as you wanted and do everything right in the fight, but thanks to Progenitorial Wrath, you could still lose, and there was nothing you could do about it. The third boss on our
Thanks
list
for
is
taking care
the
of my
Magic
leg.
Master from Final Fantasy VI, who is both frustrating and cheap.
I'm not crazy
This
about
particular
this.
boss was fought
Nice
at
way
the
to
top of
have
the
some
cultist
special
tower,
powers.
and what made this fight tough was not just the fight itself, but also the arduous journey to the top. Upon entering the tower, you would encounter a unique mechanic, whereby all commands, other than item and magic, were disabled. This led to players having to adapt pretty quickly to the new situation, especially as enemies in this particular location used these restrictions to their advantage, raining down increasingly powerful spells upon would-be thieves. You could cast Reflect or use the Reflect Ring to try and negate the damaging effects of these spells, but enemies would attempt to adapt their attack patterns to try and take advantage, as they would also have Reflect cast on themselves as an innate ability.
The new Nerf Fortnite Pro SG with Reach Load is the ultimate in-game blast. Each sold separately, hour now. Insurance made easy, so you can get on with your day.
It meant the cultist tower was a grueling dungeon, especially as there were no save points throughout and teleport was not allowed. And as you progressed, it could lead to second-guessing your progress and setup if you did not know what was coming. Enter the Magic Master. After making it to the top of the cultist tower, you were surrounded by cultists, and one, who looked rather different to the others, approached alone. It was an unwelcome sight, and the Magic Master showed no pity, raining down high-level spells at every opportunity. Thankfully, most of his attacks could be negated by using Reflect or the Reflect Ring, but for those devilish enough to try and thwart his power, the Magic Master had one trick left up his sleeve: Ultima. Unlike many other spells in the game, Ultima could not be reflected, and upon being defeated, the Magic Master would cast it, hoping to take the party with them into oblivion. To survive, you would either need to cast 3 rays on the entire party, be at an extremely high level, or jump out of range at the right time to avoid them. But the only way to know when it was coming would be to keep casting Libra over and over again. It was a brutal end to a brutal dungeon. But no matter how brutal it was, nothing compared to the brutality of Wygraf from Final Fantasy Tactics, and everything that surrounded one particular fight against him at the Rio Grande Castle.
Not now! Not today!
This sequence of events broke the boundaries of what was meant to be cheap, but it wasn't just a particular mechanic within the fight that was cheap. It was the scenario the game itself presented that was cheap, and Wygraf just happened to be at the center of it all. Prior to transforming into Goliath, Wygraf would square off with Bronzer in a duel. By this point in the game, Wygraf was a level 28 White Knight, or a 4th level Diamond equivalent. It meant he was tough as nails, and his job was to gain access to a full complement of Cody Knight abilities, but in addition, he also had Safeguard, Move +1, and Counter. It made for a rough duel, and if you didn't have the right equipment or skills, it was nearly impossible to win. What was cheap about this particular situation, though, was that if you encountered this scenario and had saved right before the fight, there would be no chance for you to go back to either level up more or purchase new equipment to try and level the playing field. In other words, your save would be unwinnable, and you would be forced to restart the game from the beginning. Should you have been able to progress past that initial fight, though, Wygraf would transform, and the remainder of your party would join the fray. But you could then encounter the exact same scenario, as the difficulty ramped up even more thanks to Belial summoning Cyclops and his minions using spells like Unholy Darkness. It was a cheap move from the game itself, locking players into unwinnable battles, and the only way to circumvent this scenario from occurring was to always keep multiple save files with various states of progression so that you could backtrack and better prepare. The next devilish foe on our list is Ruby Weapon. This super boss was added into Final Fantasy VII for its release outside of Japan, and it appeared in the small desert in the Gold Saucer area after Ultimate Weapon had been defeated by the party. In a basic sense, Ruby Weapon was tough due to its high defense and powerful moves. It could nullify most attacks that did not ignore defense or have a fixed damage output, and Ruby Ray and Ruby Flame, in addition to its gravity-based attacks, would pose significant problems. It also used its tentacles to confuse and frustrate players. Dealing with all of these elements was tricky, but Ruby also had numerous other cards up its sleeves to turn the tides in its favor, some of which were just downright unfair. For example, the battle would always start as a back attack. It meant you would start with no ATB gauge, and Ruby Weapon got a damage boost on its physical damage output until it was struck. Due to its tentacles, it was also not possible to escape. You could defeat the tentacles in an attempt to try and make the fight more manageable, but Ruby would then retaliate by using Roll Sound.
At least tell me it's fast. He's right.
Wanna play?
We'll see.
Download now on Google Play.
If you went into this fight without knowing what to expect, Roll Sound would have been a real kick in the teeth, as it permanently removed a party member from the fight. This would immediately ruin most strategies, and it was incredibly cheap. As time has progressed though, many have found that the best way to try and circumvent Ruby's frustrating moveset is to actually only fight with one character, turning them into a one-man army and blasting Ruby out of this world with massive damage. In fact, there are now so many different ways to beat Ruby Weapon successfully, it kind of makes you appreciate how much depth the Final Fantasy VII battlefield actually has. After talking about Ruby Weapon, we're going to stick with the theme and focus on another super boss that was added after the initial version of the game was shipped. The Final Fantasy III remake on the Nintendo DS featured a full host of improvements, and one of them was an unnamed optional dungeon that could only be accessed after receiving all 4 letters from the Old Four Men and Prince Aelus, defeating all the bosses in Eureka, opening approximately 80% of the game's treasure chests, and completing the 3 other optional dungeons. Once inside the super dungeon, you would square off against a whole host of powerful enemies, but the Iron Giant was by far the most troublesome. In addition to having formidable stats and a huge amount of HP, what made the Iron Giant so tough was how cheap it was in comparison to anything else fought within the game. For one, whenever the Iron Giant attacked, it could inflict various status ailments. It also attacked 4 times per turn, meaning it could wreck a party without you even having the chance to respond. Once approximately 65% of its health had been depleted, the Iron Giant would then switch up its moveset using Swipe, which would hit every party member, dealing a significant chunk of damage. It was rough. With the right preparation, some of these advantages could be nullified, such as having ribbons equipped or placing everyone in the back room and raining down magical hellfire. And that brings us nicely onto the final cheapster in this list, the one and only Ozma. This super boss has become renowned thanks to the unique mechanics present within Final Fantasy IX. Unlike many other games in the franchise, which have seen super bosses sporting huge amounts of HP, locking players into tense battles that could last for hours, Final Fantasy IX was much more focused on short-term encounters that were hard as nails. Ozma only had 55,535 HP, and if you were lucky, you could technically win within 6 turns of the fight commencing. But there were so many obstacles thrown in your way that even if you did everything right, in theory, you could still end up staring at a game over screen. One of the things that made Ozma so tough was that it would change its behavior based on how you set up your party. For example, if you had your party set up to absorb or nullify elemental attacks or status effects, Ozma wouldn't waste any turns casting those spells. And going down this route would seem like a good idea in theory, but it actually made the fight harder as Ozma would become more focused. And this was because with less moves to use, it would increase the probability of Ozma casting Meteor. Much like the standard version of the spell, this would deal a random amount of damage. But Ozma's enhancement was that the spell wouldn't ever miss, and it had the chance to deal 9,999 damage to the entire party, which would lead to an instant game over if you were unlucky. Outside of this unfortunate situation, Ozma also had a few other unfair advantages. For example, it could work outside the established ATB system. When it was charging, any action performed against Ozma would lead it to instantly receive a turn, making it extremely difficult to have more than one turn in a row before Ozma performed a move of its own. Ozma could also perform counterattacks, with one counter in particular seeing it cure itself for a huge amount of HP. It meant that with the way Ozma was configured, it was not just a simple fight, and successful runs could even last over 10 minutes. It meant that Ozma was an incredibly cheap boss, and if you defeated it, give yourself a big pat on the back. Now, even though we featured 7 cheap bosses here, there are of course many others that have featured over the years, and we would love to hear your thoughts on ones that caused you grief as well. If there are some really strong suggestions, who knows, we may even make a follow-up video. For now though, we hope you really enjoyed this trip down memory lane, and if you did, then please do consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. We'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.
Whatever you're looking for, your best shopping starts with Google.
Once a week for about a year, AC/DC have kicked off the wrestling fans' Friday night by asking if they were ready for a good time. And for about 2 months over the course of those 12, SmackDown has actually provided one. A truly bizarre brand at its worst, but bizarrely brilliant at its best. The first spell of Friday's show, being WWE's billion-dollar brand, has played host to Roman Reigns realizing every bit of his limitless potential in the space of a month, as well as Roman Reigns being covered head to toe in dog food. It is a lot to have happened in a year, but then that's the story of most people's 2022. And SmackDown's got caught for this sort of bollocks. Even when it presented WWE at its most critically acclaimed, it still had something of a wild side. With that in mind, I'm Adam Wilborn from What Culture, and these are 10 times SmackDown went too far. Number 10, shagged to death. Thanks to the work of Paul Heyman's celebrated SmackDown 6 and solid protection of the whole Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle story, watching the Blue Brand wasn't hard in 2003, or at least not as hard as the contents of Al Wilson's underpants during his deranged wedding to Dawn Marie anyway. Fresh off his divorce from daughter Tori's mother, jolly old Al appeared with eyes wandering, quicker than verbal delivery. A charm and charisma black hole, to the point where the black hole itself sort of became charming and charismatic. Al's exhibition of what Dawn could enjoy on their killer honeymoon during the nuptials should have told us how close the fatal attraction was. To put it bluntly, Wilson shagged till his heart stopped. Number 9, John Bastard Layfield. John Bastard Layfield was the sound many made as they switched off SmackDown and WWE forever when the former APA man became WWE champion in 2004. And it somehow got even worse before it got better. We should have expected it to turn out this way. His instant repackaging as a Mr. McMahon avatar was a major clue of things to come after all. What we shouldn't have expected, though, was for him to literally and giddily boots Mexicans over the US border to build heat with Eddie Guerrero. At some point, this is on the company rather than us. Built into an angle that feasted on old school heat and low-hanging fruit, the Big Texan was also made responsible for Latino Heat's mother having a heart attack in the ring before bludgeoning the champion in their first bout for the belt. It really was as much about content as delivery. The wrestling gods just looked so bloody happy to be himself. Brilliant if what you're doing doesn't reek of the type of jingoistic terror that divides nations. Less so if your outspoken political and personal views seem to skew in that direction too. Number 8, 7-7 Hassan Attacks. A dated and horribly timed segment with The Undertaker that ultimately went so far that it brought his This Week story with Muhammad Hassan to an abrupt halt. This wasn't just SmackDown going too far, but WWE going too stupid and then going too far.
Receiving incoming transmission.
More than we could chew with The Undertaker, as was obvious to all at the time. So to try and balance the books, he led a gang of masked associates in an assault on the dead man on a SmackDown episode taped on July 4th. The group garroted him with piano wire before carrying Marta and manager Davari out on their shoulders. America's birthday, cheapest heat, jingoism, we get it, but never should have. The segment inexplicably aired in full on international local British broadcast on July 8th, despite the London 7-7 bombings in 26, injuring hundreds more. Hassan's WWE career in real and storyline terms was appropriately laid to rest by the former American badass at the Great American Bash later that month. It was the only possible and failed way for a back one of the grossest run-ins ever. Number 7, In Hell. You know all about this one, and if you don't, it's really not worth going back to the brand new WWE Network archives to find. All said the recently deceased Eddie Guerrero was in hell. Presumably by that, he didn't mean going back through the annual WWE Network archives. Mysterio was headed to WrestleMania, thanks to a 2006 Royal Rumble victory. Orton used the particularly grim verbiage to bait the babyface, putting his shoulder on the line. While the company began constructing a wellness policy following Eddie's passing, they clearly thought little for the staff tasked with coming up with the creative feuds such as this one. Whoever came up with this, or greenlit it, we all know who that was clearly anything but well. Number 6, and eating it too. When Mickie James gained decisive redemption at the 2010 Royal Rumble as a grand payoff to the whole Mickie James storyline with Michelle McCool and Layla, the 20-second victory was designed to be as emphatic as the heat segments that built towards it. It failed. After months of bullying James, a body-shaming angle located a Medea and a deeply upsetting beatdown of the baby. The storyline had called for Laycool to conduct a campaign of abuse against Mickie as avatars the organization's genuinely ludicrous belief that she was somehow overweight. Vignettes putting James's face on a farmyard hog gave the arc its lifetime label, but nothing sunk as low as Laycool rammed a cake into James's face at the climax of this humiliating scene. Mickie was left drenched in fruit punch and her own tears after having the dessert and various other foodstuffs thrust upon her in a scene that might have made for great fiction had it not been tied to disgusting fact. To a pinpoint degree, the angle masterfully captured the true horrors of bullying. It just failed to highlight who the actual offenders were. Be a star, kids. Number 5, the Grand Assault of Canyon. So, Paul Heyman, Big Show's agent and causeless stirrer back in the day, was giving Undertaker gifts as a way to apologize for his giant client assault several months earlier. He pied off a singing telegram and brother love in weeks prior for having cycled through those lame old gags. They were ready to be cruel. Dressed as Boy George and trying to charm him with a few bars of I'm a Chameleon because Canyon was gonna pay. Was gonna pay because this badass was always kicking asshole ass. Yeah, in summary, The Undertaker wrecked him for real sense. That's the question why they chose Canyon for the role. Why wouldn't they? Number 4, animalistic. After years of Kurt Angle imposing his physical will upon his opponents, he turned his attention inexplicably to Booker T's wife Charmel in a hideous storyline extenuated by a misspoken line about wanting bestiality sex. infamous remark came just weeks after Booker had dared to cost Kurt a shot at the WWE title. Angle, in response, psychotically announced his love for gutter sluts, promises of sexual assault. What in the holy hell was going on here, and for what exactly? The moral victory when he won the feud by pinning her in the grim finale? Indeed, Kurt, the sex offender, was given a major victory in the handicap match conclusion. They had one last match in them, but it was all to transition Angle to his anti-ECW angle, as then it was to continue their rival. It was refreshingly free of sex crimes, but Kurt had already done his most worst. Number 3, the Mad King. Terrorists are going to burn down the Undertaker's house, his children are going to be kidnapped, and his wife is going to be raped by a motorcycle gang right in front of him. Embroiled in a feud with the dead man, McMahon delivered his vitriol when GM Paul Heyman revealed he'd be gone until their Survivor Series match for the chairman's own good. McMahon flipped what turned out not to be his wig and, came out with all that. Not only that, he wasn't done. Turning on the former ECW chief, he threatened that if Heyman didn't oversee these oddly specific atrocities, he'd strangle him to death and then fire him. Hitting Paul, it wouldn't even be the worst abuse he'd face before buggering clean off in 2006. Number 2, Brock Lesnar ends Kofi Mania. How far is your too far? It's been over a year since Kofi Kingston was humiliated by Brock Lesnar on the first Fox edition of SmackDown, and outside of a brief Royal Rumble roughhousing, he hasn't gone absolutely insane and bad the beast in a violent revenge attack. The manner of the loss was a burial just too far. The fact he lost his WWE Championship in a matter of seconds and didn't seem to give a toss was just an underthought too far. In every wrong direction WWE could travel with this angle, they travelled too far. The New Day man had audiences, me included, crying buckets over his victory at WrestleMania early in the year, and though some of his painfully mid-card matches left fans bored to tears in the months that followed, he deserved substantially better than the squash he was made to suffer when he lost it. WWE seems to genuinely revel in the disappointment of its audience on occasions, and this remains one of the most recent egregious examples. Number 1, Paul Murray. With the show just weeks away from WrestleMania 19, there was a tremendous amount on the SmackDown agenda in early 2003. None of it, sadly, on Raw, Trish Stratus, Victoria and Jazz were revving up for their Show of Shows showcase, and on SmackDown, it was all about the Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan and Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar headliners. Dawn could only get pay-per-view attention by trying out for a new, hideous franchise known as Girls Gone Wild. For those too young or ignorant or pretending they're both to remember GGW, it was various parades of girls getting shit-faced and topless, all coerced into both, sold via pay-per-view. Some co-promotion with WWE naturally followed, dragging in already lost cause Sean O'Haire and post-coitus Al Wilson widow Dawn Marie for this one-off moment of ridiculous TNA, not that one, madness. Are you telling me that I should flash the audience tonight? She asked of the man that looked like he was in for a major push about 3 weeks earlier. Dawn, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, he replied, hitting the catchphrase that was already less over than it was 3 weeks ago. And so she did, because that really showed her. Being Michael Cole and Taz, whose view wasn't obscured expertly by the ring. And that's our list. Did we miss any out? Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to What Culture Wrestling Money to iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling content. Of course, you can let know your thoughts on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Or actually, there, follow me at Adam Wilborn. Thanks for watching. I've been Adam from What Culture. I'll see you soon.
I don't know how all of you saw the introduction of the Queen from the Rising of the Shield Hero, but here's my view of it. But she's not here to look pretty on a throne.
as the Queen of Melromark is not only on a mission to bring peace to the world, but also wields a firm hand in dealing justice. So join me as we explore the motives, methods, and philosophy behind Best Hot Mom, Queen Morelia Q. Melromark, as well as discuss her future plans for our heroes. And as always, royal spoilers ahead. Morelia Q. Melromark is a very clever and creative queen, has a deep sense of justice, and is very diplomatic and even scheming in her goals for peace. As Melty explained, her mother has been traveling on diplomatic missions in order to keep the peace and avoid war with other nations, and nothing will stop her from achieving this. She's not even afraid to use her own children for this mission. Melty was a valuable asset, or pawn, in the Queen's game of chess to ensure peace and contact with the Shield Hero. So confident in her plan to recruit the Shield Hero to her side and rid the country of scum, the Queen risked Melty's safety with Naofumi to defeat the Church of the Three Heroes. Yes, you could say that the Queen had everything under control with these shadows, which were tasked with making sure Naofumi wasn't hostile towards Melty, but damn, this is a bit too close for comfort. The Queen really is a Grand Master, except has more creative ways to deal with justice than a Melty stick. For life. Speaking of justice, her second best trait, she's not afraid to send down that sweet judgment on her family members as she punishes her husband, and that Princess Mine gets what all bitches deserve. Don't worry, Mine. I mean, bitchy. We all send our thoughts and prayers. The Queen's stern demeanor, even against her own family, is reminiscent of the Snow Queen. You know, the Danish fairy tale turned Disney movie. Morelia even has ice magic. Damn, she really is Elsa from Frozen. Alright, Truth Hero, take your hot mom puns and your icy Disney comparison, and just let it go, let it go. This judgment scene could just be setting her up as the righteous monarch type, as the Queen is fair and just, even if it's her family that committed the transgressions. But there's a bit more to it. It's also to further win over Naofumi. She's completely honest with the Shield Hero. After all, she even admitted she was using Naofumi and told him the whole story of how her orders, and the consensus of the other nations, were violated in her absence by the Church and King Trash as they summoned all four heroes to Melromark instead of waiting their turn as fourth in the pecking order. Or how Naofumi should have been summoned to Shieldbelt, where people treat him like a god and worship in the religion of the Church of the Shield Hero. By condemning her family members, and justly so, it proves to the Shield Hero that she is impartial, that he can trust royals, and that even though he is a pawn in her game, her game is ultimately peace and justice. Also, she needs Naofumi to stay in Melromark, help her country, and unite the four heroes. Simple stuff, no big deal. This scene of Princess Biatch and King Trash finally getting justice, finally getting their just desserts, feels so good as a fan. Just thank you, Morelia. Just like, yas, Queen. Sorry. I'll never, ever do that again. This scene is also an expose on the Queen's character and shows just how clever she really is. Morelia is so concerned with peace and uniting the heroes with Naofumi, she knows she must pass judgment, even if it's against her own family. But that doesn't mean this is easy for her. How does one punish a family they still love without being too harsh, yet still punish someone firmly enough to appease someone, the Shield Hero, that they desperately need by their side? This Snow Queen soft spot is indulged in a very creative way. She simply allows Naofumi to be creative in punishment. Instead of a normal death sentence, he gets to choose. He gets to brilliantly roast and embarrass the people that caused him so much strife, and she gains his trust. More pandering to the Shield Hero, all part of her genius plan. Deep down, she still loves Mine and her husband Alcray. Actually, she really does love Alcray. If you were wondering, like I was, how did this fine thing get with this piece of trash? Well, there is a very good reason for this. Her hobbies. This is also why she's so fond of Naofumi and reuniting the four cardinal heroes. Say what? Hobbies? Okay, real quick, let me explain. In the past, Morelia's country was at war with the demi-human country of Shiltbelt for centuries. She fell in love and married Alcray Melromark, Trash, who rose to fame from his war heroics. He later became the Kane hero, and it was revealed that he is the true heir to the nation of Fobli. Much of the Queen's interest for peace among nations and people is rooted in her hobbies of studying the legends of the four cardinal heroes. She's also inspired by her husband's homeland of Fobli, where both human and demi-human coexist in peace, and thus seeks to fix this problem in Monomark as she sees it as useless squabbling. Basically, she's a fangirl for the legendary weapons. She stan the cardinal heroes. And she has absolute power. Just like Nafumi and myself, the Queen's basically an otaku.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Morelia's ultimate goal is peace. She wants humans and demi-humans to coexist and be equal, just like how they live in Fobli. She's truly following her passions. But as clever and persuasive as she may be, it might be another thing to get the heroes to actually cooperate. Her plan is for our heroes to travel to the island of Kalmira, where experience gains are boosted for a limited time, and new adventures await us viewers in what I suspect will be Season 2. As I'm sure you all are, I'm looking forward to this new arc. Or should I say, this new La-Arc. As always, thanks for watching. I wonder if Nafumi should have just had them executed. At least they have this option later if they misbehave, which, spoilers, is exactly what she